Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be doing a Ryzen cooler and CPU thermal testing roundup. I did start to do this with the Ryzen 7s, but there was the whole drama around the 20-degree offset with the higher end 95-watt Ryzen CPUs, and that is in a lot of the aftermarket programs. You may see or notice that it looks like your temperatures are quite hot. When I did my original testing, I did say fans are going nuts, but there's no heat coming out the top, and that was because the CPUs were actually 20 degrees below what was being reported in all the software. It was just something that AMD decided in their infinite wisdom would be a good idea, and really ended up not being. Now with the latest version of Ryzen Master, anything with that 20 degrees offset, Ryzen Master is now ignoring, and I think a lot of the aftermarket programs and motherboards are going to be doing the same as well. Did make it really confusing, and it did end up ruining our initial Ryzen testing because we did go through more coolers than this. But obviously all of the results were then, we literally finished it, got it written up, I'd made the video, and then that morning AMD turned around and went, oh yeah, they've all got a 20-degree offset. And I was like, you so-and-sos. But anyway, so what we've done is we've now limited the coolers down. There are a few more water coolers, but you'll see why in a little bit. And we've now tested with the Ryzen 5s as well. So we've kept it with the X's, and we've done 1500x, 1600x and 1800x. 1800x, you can pretty much take that for the thermal results that you will get with the 1700 and the 1700x as well. The 1600x will pretty much cover the 1600 as well, and the same with the 1500 with the 1500x with the 1500. The only real thing is XFR, and if you manually set your volts or do any kind of overclocking, XFR becomes null and void anyway, so it's a fairly good way to kind of get in there, get it sorted and get your head round. It's a ballpark figure for you anyway. So we have a range of coolers. But our test rig first is the Corsair Air 540. It's my motherboard test rig. It just made it easy at the time of doing it. Before you ask what the stickers are, they're actually decals. I had them custom made. No, you can't buy them. No, you can't have the 3D files for them. If you would like to do something similar, then you're just going to have to go to a sign shop like I did and get something designed for you. Anyway, the motherboard that we chose was the Corsair Crosshair 6. We chose that because at the time of testing there was still a lot of hoo-ha about the mounting procedure, because the AM4 mount that goes through the motherboard is different to the AM3 mount. Now the Crosshair 6 does support both. It's the only motherboard that does support both at the moment. Thankfully now though, a lot of the manufacturers do have AM4 mounts out for the coolers. Like, for argument's sake, there was a bit of drama just recently within the last few days that the Corsair mount was exactly the same as the NZXT mount, and people were saying that it was copied, or it was not fake news, but I want to keep wanting to say it in videos. But it was basically, they were saying that it was a rip-off. Well, it's not. It's just the fact that the Corsair and the Kraken share the same OEM. They share the same base mount for the actual, if you turn the CPU heatsink round, it's the same, and that's why they're cross-compatible. And it's just because, like I said, they're made by the same people. So the other good thing about that is, if you can only get hold of one, say for example you're going through eBay or something and you're watching this video in 12 months time or something like that, then they are cross-compatible. That's a good thing. Corsair are giving them to people with a receipt, or you can buy them for £4. NZXT are sending them out. You can get them from NZXT as well. Noctua, you have to prove that you bought the cooler, so with a receipt, and you also have to prove that you own an AM4 motherboard, same name and address on the receipts. CryoRig you can contact about it. We've got the Cooler Master Master Liquid 240 here. One of the reasons why we actually included this is it did come with an AM4 mount straight out of the box. Now the thing is there are two different types of mounts. There are the mounts that go through the board, and the Asetek ones do go through the board, which is why you needed the adjusted mounts for them. Luckily, like I said, the Crosshair 6 supports AM3, AM4. But the secondary type of mount is the one that clips onto the plastic retaining bracket. You know when you get the motherboard out of the box, you've got a little black thing at the top and a little black thing at the bottom, just above and below your CPU cooler, where you can attach coolers to that. The Wraith actually does it the same way. And you clip them in. You know these ones. Well, anyway, if your CPU cooler is one of these little clippy ones, then it will support AM4. It's only the ones that go through the board that need the newer, updated mounts. And again, you can go and look at your manufacturer website. You'll probably find you may even be able to get one if they've got an updated one. You may even find that you'll be able to get one for free. So, talking about, we've done the rig, we can talk about the actual coolers themselves. The Cryo Rig H7, £36.95. Why have we included it? Well, we wanted to start somewhere, and this seemed like a really good one. It performs really well when we've done our tests in the past. It's a reasonable amount of money. It's a good step up. A step up from what, Tom? Well, some of the coolers do come with stock coolers and some of them don't. The whole AMD stock cooler thing at the moment, you almost need a degree in just being able to understand that. So in our tests, the 1500X has the Wraith Spire in the graphs, and this is the Wraith Spire. It's the non-RGB one, but it is the thicker Spire cooler. 1600X doesn't come with a cooler. There is no option for it to come with a stock cooler. Weirdly though, the 1800X can come with a stock cooler, and that is the Wraith Max. This is pretty much the old Wraith that was coming with the older 8 cores, so like pile driver and stuff, but they've got RGB for it now. It's the RGB cable for it is literally like a normal 4-pin RGB, and it's enormous. So this in itself is a bit of a turn off, but to be honest with you, for a stock cooler, it is quite pretty. So this is in the 1800X graph. Excuse me, this is going to happen a couple of times. Excuse me. And this is in the 1500X graph, but there's nothing in the 1600X graph, and we can't do anything about that. We've just done the ones that you may end up purchasing. We didn't want to go through and start adding more stock coolers that you might not even want. It's just there as a baseline for the graphs, and you will see that once you introduce the overclock, I do apologise. Once you introduce the overclock, they kind of fall off the bottoms of the graphs anyway. Next one up, cooler wise, away from the H7, you go to the Noctua NHD15S. This is the one with one fan in the middle, which means that you've not got the one on the outside. Also means it's got slightly better memory support and doesn't hang over the first PCI Express slot, because the dual one can do that, and it can affect your graphics card, and it can mean that you can't even fit your graphics card on the very top slot. The Cooler Master Master Liquid 240, again come with AM4 support out of the box. It's written on the box, it's planned to have been AM4. This actually comes in at £79.95, so 80 quid for a 240mm AIO. Then for the Corsair H100i V2, 240mm again, that goes up to £106.99. The H115i, that's a 280mm cooler, and that's £225.99. The NZXT Kraken X52, this is a 240mm cooler, and this comes in at £139.99. And then the Kraken X62, that's a 280mm cooler, so 140mm fans, and that comes in at £149.99. Deep breaths, lots of information. Right, just to confuse matters even more, when it comes to stock volts with your CPU, if you've not changed anything, it's not stock. It's doing what the board wants. I have been testing a board this week. It's one of the larger manufacturers. I've not made a video on it. I've got a couple of Ryzen stuff going up this week, but I've not made a video on it because I'm currently arguing with their BIOS depth. Because for an 1800X at stock, it's putting 1.428 volts through it, and when you put it under load, it's going up to 1.524. And that is because of this new AGISA code that they're adding in to help sort the memory problems. And when you introduce that into the BIOS engineers are just having to start from scratch, and the voltages is something that they hadn't picked up on yet. So you do have to keep an eye on that. So if you think it's a bit hot, have a look at your voltages. How do I do that? Download CPU-Z and look at CPU-Z. If you use a program like OCCT to put load on it, you'll actually even be able to look at the volts going up and down. If you use hardware monitor, you can then also store the minimum, the maximum and the current values of your V-core, so you can actually keep a good record of it as well. And if you think it's a bit high, you can go into the BIOS and start turning it down. If you turn it down a notch at a time, a little bit at a time, and then go and play a game, or better for you to run a benchmark test again like OCCT to see if it's still stable. And if you reduce your volts, you will notice that your fan speeds may lower themselves as well, because your temperatures will come down, because your the majority of the heat will be getting caused by the voltages that are being put through your CPU. So it's a simple thing, reduce the volts and then you will reduce your temps. So our stock volts for the 1500X are 1.31 volts. Our stock volts, and this is auto volts, for the 1600X are 1.28 volts. And then the 1800X, amazingly, are 1.22 volts. Now we've not changed this. We could have just gone in and put, I reckon we could have probably got them running at 1.2, 1.225 each and then fixed it. But again, we wanted to keep it where you guys may have been, and also to throw up the issue that it does with this, you know, you've got an 8 core that's running on less volts than the others. BIOS updates sometimes fix this, but as I have also tried to stress, can also break that. So owning a PC, if you want to keep an eye on it, and you know, things can get broken, but that's where you learn to go in and fix things and manually address certain issues yourself. The BIOS isn't a scary place, because if it all goes wrong, you can normally hit F5, load optimized defaults, and then start again from scratch. But anyway, so 1500X at stock settings. At the bottom, the Wraith Spire. Now the Wraith Spire, I need to make sure I get it on the right side. Anyway, the Wraith Spire, whichever side, and not around the graph, it'll be in front of me, so we'll go this way. There we go! So I shouldn't be doing this for a living, should I? Anyway, so the Wraith Spire, that's the one at the bottom. It's not in the overclock graph, which you'll see in a minute, but it does give us a relatively decent base to the graph. And then you've got the 7 volt cryo rig down there at the bottom, and 12 volt, and then you see it. One of the things I will say with the temperatures, throughout this, we have a 70-degree cutoff, because that's an AMD maximum thermal limit. Now we've got that 20-degree offset out the way. It's not 90 on some and 70 on others. It's 70 across the board. If you want to keep an eye on your temperatures and you want it to be reading the true CPU value, then download AMD Ryzen Master. That's what we use for ours. And it does even have a logging program where you can look through a wavy graph to see what the maximum temperature would have been. And that's how we've done this with all of our results. So we have the maximum temperature is the red graph. Then the white bar is our ambient temperature, which is fixed at 20 degrees because we've got air conditioning in the room, and it does keep the temperature very, very stable. We've also got a couple of thermometers in the room so that we can have a double check with temps as well. And then the grey bar is the delta temperature, and the way that you get the delta temperature is you remove the ambient temperature from the maximum temperature, and that gives you basically your temperature above the temperature of the room. So with this, you've got NZXT at the top, and then you've got a lot of 12 volt mixes in there. You've basically got 12 volt at the top, big block of 7s, and then you get the Cooler Master and then the Noctua. When we move on to overclocking with all of the CPUs was done at 1.4 volts. With 3200 megahertz memory, and we set the SoC volts manually to 1.1 volts to make sure that the 3200 was working fine, but also not being raged too high. By manually setting them, it meant we've got everything into check. I did need to tell you the SoC volts because it can make a huge difference. If you've got your SoC volts running at 1.2, for example, you could have another 5 degrees on these temperatures. So it is something to keep in mind. 3200 megahertz is also the maximum memory speed that you can get on Ryzen without changing the base clock. Base clock isn't actually supported out of the box. The boards that can change the base clock, and then that means you can actually take the memory speeds up a little bit more, have an added clock generator chip on the board. So it's not a stock thing, which is why a lot of the boards don't support it. So 1300 megahertz is your kind of upper limit, and the rest is pretty much enthusiast based stuff from then on out. So with the 3200 megahertz in play, I would actually say that for if you're really aiming for the best that you can get without it being a total pain in the bottom, then 3200 megahertz is the place where you stop. That isn't a bad place, because even on, for argument's sake, like X99, 3200 megahertz was the sweet spot for that. It's only really Z270 if you want to compare platform for platform that pushed up, pushed right up from there. And to be honest with you, I do think 3200 is it's a good, sensible spot for all of the platforms. Anyway, in this overclock temperature, what you can see here is we don't have the spire on the bottom, but the cryo rig did still make a valiant effort and come in with a 69 degree temperature. We would have accepted 70 degrees on this, but anything above we would have called a fail. So we've got you've got the cryo rigs there. You've got the Noctua does take a good chunk away from it. I mean, you lose 7 degrees just from adding, just by having the Noctua. So that extra heatsink space does give you, and that's even with 7 volt. It drops, it's only a couple of degrees if you add up to 12 volts though. So for something like the 1500X, this is a really good cooler. The fact that you can run it at 7 volts and still have an overclock in play and be on full load, this is a really good one. It's not doing too bad, to be honest with you, especially for the price difference. I mean, you think about it, it's half the price. But you're just going to have a little bit more noise or a little bit more heat. And then you get into the water coolers, and basically with all the graphs you've got the Corsairs and the Krakens arguing for the top spots, depending on whether it's 7 or 12 volts. But the one that's always seemed to be fairly consistent is the Cooler Master, which we'll talk about in a little bit. 1600X testing, we're now moving up to 6 cores and 12 threads. Again, it was slightly lower voltage than the 4 cores, so we did get some fairly good temps with this one as well. We've not got a stock cooler in this graph though, and I've explained why. When we move up to the overclock testing, we actually lose the cryo rig from these graphs. It wasn't enough even at 12 volts. With the Master Liquid, this is one of the times where it kind of starts to mix in with the rest of the pack. The 12 volt though does just beat the Corsair H100i V2 at 7 volt. So it's a fan speed thing, but you do need to kind of remember with fan speeds, 12 volts on Cooler Masters, we do know, on Corsairs, we do know that they absolutely turbo mode their fans. Then the 7 volt was actually around about the same. It was 2 degrees difference with them both at 7 volts between the Master Liquid and the H100i. Then we move on to testing again. We go up to the 1800X. This is 1800X stock testing, and the Wraith Max at the bottom is this one. It's the square one, the one that I said about. It is an option, very limited numbers to be able to get this cooler. And you can see the kind of numbers that you get here at the bottom. The thing to remember when you, especially with this looks like it could be epic, but one of the things to remember when you load up all of the cores, it does then go to its very base clock, and that's another reason why the volts can drop a little bit. So when you do load testing with these CPUs at stock, it's not doing any of the boosting. You don't get 1 core boost, don't get 2 core boost, don't get nothing. They drop back to 3600 megahertz, but it does give us a kind of an idea what's going across. The real stress comes in when you introduce 1.4 volts and our 3200 megahertz memory onto the 1800X, because you've obviously got a full 1.4 volts get surging through, and you lose a few things out of the graphs. There is no cryo rig in the graph at all. There is no 7 volt NHD15. You actually need this running at 12 volts just to get 65 degrees out of it. Now you do need to remember 12 volts, 65 degrees, we are absolutely smashing the CPU to bits at this point. It's not going to be the sort of temperatures that you're going to get with any kind of gaming load. It is a worst case scenario. But you do also need to remember that we have to keep these temperatures below 70 degrees or 70 or below. So you can see that the heat difference from 12 to 7 volts was just too much for the NHD 15S. May have been a little bit better with a second fan, but I very much doubt it. This was one of the times actually when the Corsair actually came out on top. The H115i on MaxiChat actually did just beat out the X62. So it did relatively well there. So when we go through the actual pack, you've had a lot of results there. I know I have to talk about it, but it is just easy. You can obviously pause and all that sort of stuff. But to break the coolers down, what we ended up doing with the CryoRig, it's a great little cooler. If you've got one of the 6 cores or above and you're planning on doing big overclocks though, it's probably not going to be the cooler for you. If you're looking at having a small overclock, maybe some manually set volts, looking to save some money, not looking to kind of like get 4 gigahertz out of your CPU or anything like that, it will most definitely serve you well. But across the board, that's going to be the same for 120mm coolers, unless they're, you know, like massive or something. With Ryzen, if you're looking for a decent overclock and decent temperatures, then you are going to be needing to go water, and that is across the board. And that's just because they can create a fair bit of heat when you might be thinking, oh, it's only 70 degrees, but that is their maximum temperature, and if you want to keep them below that, then you are going to need a decent cooler. So awards, what we would say is with the NHD15S, if you're thinking about Ryzen 5, then even with an overclock, this is relatively good enough to be able to keep up without making you go deaf. So we would give this, for Ryzen 5, this would get the OC 3D Approved Award. With the CryoRig, you just need to know what you're buying if you're going to get the CryoRig. But this is going to go for across the range with all of the coolers as well. So, you know, any 120mm coolers, you're not going to be able to overclock loads on it if you want to have decent temps or no noise. So you're always going to have that trade-off. So you do get a value for money with the CryoRig. It is well made. You do get you know, you can get some decent performance out of it, but for £35 you are going to have a limitation, because with Ryzen you do need decent cooling. With the Krakens, they are well expensive. They are, I sound like Ali G, that is well expensive, and they are, but they do look the part, and they've got the new Acetec pumps in them, and they do all link up with cam and stuff, and they do look the part. So we're going to give them the Extreme Aesthetics Awards for both of these. But like I said, you are going to be paying a fair amount of money for the fact they've got that pretty pump and stuff on them. With the Corsair ones, they actually came in significantly cheaper. They could top the graphs. There wasn't a massive amount of difference between them. So we would give those the Performance Award. Now, we give those the Performance Award. You've obviously got possible upgrades with the ML fans and all that sort of stuff. If you're, you know, you're going to be looking, the ML fans, I will say, if you buy the white ones, they give you an awesome soft lighting effect in your rig, which is why you'll see that a lot of the review rigs are running that way, because it does actually look really nice. But really, and strangely, the star of the show is the £80 Master Liquid 240. It's 80 quid. And it was basically £10 more than the Noctua, and it didn't top the graphs. It was always in the middle of the graphs, but it always had a 7-volt result. It always had the 12-volt result was kind of, it didn't really matter. But for 80 quid, it was almost a bit of a no-brainer. So for 80 quid, really, that was probably the best of the pack, because it had the balance of performance and the price. And thankfully, as the Cooler Master logo on it was white, we did think that the hoses on it could have been a little bit shorter. But, you know, for an overall package, it was a really, really good cooler. It was actually quite surprising for the money as well. And obviously, it comes with AM4 support out the box. So really, if you're thinking AIOs, this would probably be the place to start your search. I know there are going to be people out there that are going to want to keep brand specific. You know, if you've got one brand case, you're going to want one brand cooler, and that's all fine. If you're one of those guys that just doesn't really mind and you just want it to work, and you're not even fussed if your case has got a window, you just want to play your games or be able to watch a film and not be going deaf, then that's definitely a cracking place to start. Anyway, after filming this review, what seems to have been 4 or 5 times because we've happened to make changes. But anyway, I hope this was helpful because we did put an awful lot of work into this. Like I said, all those CPUs at 12 and 7 volts with an hour run on each, changing CPUs, changing sockets. It took an absolute age. But you have the information now. I hope I have been of help, and thank you to Johnny Guru or John Giral from Corsair for showing me where to get this t-shirt from, because I think it's amazing, and it's a good thing to follow if you're building a rig. That is probably one of the best things that you can ever be told. Don't cheap out on your power supply. But for now, children, story time is over. This has been Tiny Tom Logan with another lengthy, chatty, I need a drink of water video out. Ding!